Today is May 29th, 2025, and you're listening to Space News First Up.
Discover your next mission in the space industry with the Space News Job Exchange. Visit spacenews.com/jobs to find top aerospace roles and connect with leading employers.
Here are today's top headlines in space. The U.S. Space Force has ordered 2 more GPS-3 satellites from Lockheed Martin. Another GPS satellite is scheduled to launch this week on a rapid call-up mission. China launched its first asteroid sample return mission Wednesday. NASA's Psyche asteroid mission is back on track after switching propellant lines. And a Chinese launch startup performed a vertical takeoff and splashdown test of a reusable rocket.
First Up is produced by Space News, the industry standard for professional space journalism. Visit spacenews.com for breaking news, policy updates, and original analysis.
We begin today with news that the U.S. Space Force has ordered 2 more GPS-3 satellites from Lockheed Martin. The $509.7 million award announced Wednesday covers GPS-3F satellites 21 and 22, scheduled for delivery in 2031. The order was placed under an existing 2018 contract that allows for up to 22 spacecraft. With this procurement, the Space Force has now exercised options for 12 satellites with a total contract value of $4.1 billion. The GPS-3F satellites offer enhanced anti-jamming capabilities, improved accuracy, and additional features such as an upgraded nuclear detonation detection payload and a next-generation search and rescue package. Another GPS satellite is scheduled to launch this week on a rapid call-up mission. The GPS-3 SV-08 spacecraft is set to launch Friday on a Falcon 9 after the Space Force announced in April it reassigned the launch to SpaceX from United Launch Alliance. Space Force officials said Wednesday the mission was executed on an unusually accelerated timeline, with launch planning starting in February, far shorter than the typical timeline of 18 to 24 months for a national security mission. Those officials said they accelerated the launch of this satellite to get the more advanced GPS satellites into orbit as electronic interference with navigation signals becomes a growing concern. China launched its first asteroid sample return mission Wednesday. Tianwen-2 lifted off on a Long March 3B rocket at 1:31 p.m. Eastern from Xichang Satellite Launch Center. Tianwen-2 is headed for the near-Earth asteroid 469219, Kamoa-Walawa, arriving in July 2026. The spacecraft spent 7 months studying the asteroid, 40 to 100 meters across, collecting samples that it will return to Earth in late 2027. Tianwen-2 will then spend the next 6 years going to the Comet 311P Pan-STARRS. NASA's Psyche asteroid mission is back on track after switching propellant lines. The spacecraft's electric thrusters stopped in early April after pressure dropped in a line feeding them with xenon propellant. NASA said Wednesday that engineers concluded a component in a valve in that line was not working properly, blocking the flow of propellant. NASA is switching to a backup line that will allow the electric thrusters to resume operation by mid-June. Psyche is headed to the asteroid of the same name, arriving in 2029. A Chinese launch startup performed a vertical takeoff and splashdown test of a reusable rocket. Sepok, also known as Space Epoch, launched its Yuanxing-Z1, YXZ-1, verification rocket from the Haiyang spaceport in China's Shandong province at 4:40 p.m. Eastern Wednesday. The rocket flew to an altitude of 2.5 kilometers before performing a controlled descent and soft splashdown in waters just off the coast from the spaceport. Sepok called the flight a complete success and sets the company up to attempt a first full flight of YXZ-1, also known as Hiker-1, later this year. Hiker-1 is designed to be reusable and carry up to 10,000 kilograms of payload to low Earth orbit.
Share your company's news with the entire space industry through Stellar Dispatch, the press release service from Space News. Learn more and submit yours at spacenews.com/stellardispatch.
In other news, China Daily reports China launched an Earth observation satellite early Thursday. A Long March 4B lifted off from the Jiuquan Satellite Launch Center at 12:12 a.m. Eastern and put the Shijian 26 satellite into orbit. Chinese media said the satellite, jointly developed by several organizations, will perform land survey and environmental protection services. Shijian satellites are typically experimental satellites, often with military applications. Florida Today reports that SpaceX launched more Starlink satellites from Florida Wednesday. A Falcon 9 launched from the Kennedy Space Center at 9:30 a.m. Eastern, putting 27 Starlink satellites into orbit. The booster for this launch completed its 19th flight. Mail Business newspaper reports that a South Korean startup with human spaceflight ambitions has performed the first private launch from the country. Una Stella launched its Una Express 1 suborbital rocket Wednesday, reaching an altitude of 10 kilometers. The launch was a test of engine technologies planned for a larger vehicle, including one that would carry people on suborbital flights to 100 kilometers altitude. Two Japanese companies won a contract to launch a satellite for Japan's military. Space One and Space BD said Wednesday they received a contract from the Japan Ministry of Defense for the launch of an optical imaging satellite built by Canon Electronics. The companies did not disclose the planned launch date or value of the award. Space BD will be responsible for the overall launch services, with Space One conducting the launch using its Kairos rocket. That rocket failed in its first 2 launch attempts last year, but company officials say they will attempt another launch in the near future.